In 1864, Confederate soldiers crossed into Vermont and robbed 3 banks. They stole more than $200,000, killed a civilian, and escaped into Canada. Canadian authorities eventually captured several of them. The stolen money was found. The attackers were identified, but instead of being returned to the United States, the raiders were released. A Canadian court accepted their argument that they were not ordinary criminals. They were soldiers carrying out an act of war. This is the Saint Albans Raid, one of the strangest bank robberies in American history, and this is Unresolved Filez. In October of 1864, the American Civil War was approaching its final months. Most of the fighting was happening hundreds of miles south of Vermont. Saint Albans was a prosperous town near the Canadian border. Its residents were far removed from the battlefields of Virginia, Georgia, and Tennessee. But the town had 2 things that made it an attractive target: 3 banks filled with money, and an international border less than 20 miles away. At the time, Canada was still governed by Britain. Britain was officially neutral in the American Civil War. Confederate agents could therefore operate from Canadian territory more easily than they could from inside the Union. Among those agents was a young Confederate officer named Bennet Young. Had previously been captured by Union forces, but escaped and eventually reached Canada. From there, he proposed a dangerous operation. His men would enter Vermont, rob the banks in Saint Albans, spread panic across the northern states, and escape back into Canada before Union authorities could stop them. The stolen money would support the Confederacy. The attack could also force the Union to move soldiers north to defend the border. To the Confederates, it was a military raid. To everyone inside those banks, it was an armed robbery. Young received authorization for the mission and assembled a group of Confederate soldiers in Canada. The men entered Saint Albans quietly over several days. They posed as tourists and travelers. Some claimed they had arrived for a sporting vacation. They stayed in local hotels, walked through town, and studied the banks without attracting attention. By October 19th, approximately 20 raiders were in position. Just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they moved. The men divided into groups and entered all 3 banks. They drew their weapons, threatened employees, and demanded access to the money. Other raiders controlled the streets and forced townspeople onto the village green. Some residents were even ordered to swear allegiance to the Confederacy. Within minutes, the quiet Vermont town had effectively been occupied by enemy soldiers. The raiders collected cash from the banks and from customers who entered at the wrong moment. In total, they escaped with more than $200,000. In 1864, it was an enormous fortune, but stealing the money was only one part of the plan. Young's men had also brought bottles of an incendiary substance known as Greek fire. They intended to burn buildings throughout Saint Albans, creating enough destruction and panic to cover their escape. But the substance failed to ignite properly. The town did not burn, and residents were beginning to fight back. As armed citizens confronted the raiders, gunfire erupted in the streets. Horses were stolen for the escape. People ran for cover. During the violence, a civilian named Linus Morrison was shot. He died from his wounds 2 days later. 2 other people were wounded. What had begun as a carefully planned bank robbery had become a deadly attack on American soil. Young and his men mounted their stolen horses and raced north. Behind them, local residents quickly organized a pursuit. The raiders had only one major objective left: reach Canada. Once they crossed the border, American authorities could not simply follow them and make arrests. Canada was neutral territory. Capturing the raiders there without permission could create an international conflict with Britain. The Confederates reached Canada that evening, but their escape did not go completely as planned. Canadian authorities arrested several members of the group and recovered a portion of the stolen money. The United States demanded their extradition. From the American perspective, the case appeared straightforward. The men had entered 3 banks with guns. They had stolen a fortune. A civilian had been killed. But the raiders presented a different argument. They claimed they were Confederate soldiers acting under official military orders. They had not entered Vermont for personal profit. They said they had conducted an authorized operation against an enemy nation. That argument forced the Canadian courts to answer an extraordinary question. Were these men bank robbers, or were they prisoners of war? If they were ordinary criminals, Canada could return them to the United States to face prosecution. But if the robbery was recognized as a military operation, extraditing them could violate British neutrality. In December of 1864, the court released the raiders. The decision caused outrage throughout the United States. The attackers had been caught. Part of the stolen money had been recovered. Their identities were known, yet they were allowed to leave because their crime had been committed under the authority of the Confederacy. Further legal proceedings continued, but the raiders were never returned to Vermont for punishment. No one served time for the attack on Saint Albans or the death of Linus Morrison. Canada eventually returned recovered funds to the banks. However, much of the stolen fortune remained beyond their reach. The raid also left lasting fear along the northern border. If Confederate soldiers could quietly enter one Vermont town, Rob its banks, kill a resident, and escape. Other northern communities could also be vulnerable. More than 160 years later, the Saint Albans Raid remains difficult to classify. The raiders did not capture a military fort. They did not destroy a railroad or defeat Union soldiers in battle. They robbed banks, but they did so under military orders during the Civil War, intending to finance the Confederate government and spread fear throughout the North. To the Confederates, it was a legitimate raid. To the United States, it was a violent attack. To the residents of Saint Albans, it was undoubtedly a robbery. Perhaps it was all. 3. A bank heist carried out by soldiers, military operation targeting civilians, and a crime, protected by the confusion of war. So what were Bennett Young and his men? Soldiers following orders? Criminals hiding behind their uniforms? Or something between the two? Let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe to Unresolved Files for more forgotten crimes, unexplained disappearances, and mysteries that history never completely settled. Until next time, stay curious.